I found this piece of wood more than a year ago, and since then I've known exactly what I want to do with it. I think it would be a beautiful piece to turn into a bowl. All I would really have to do is cut off this outer light section of the wood, make this inner dark section a bit more circular, and it would look excellent. There's only one problem though. When you have a piece of wood that's cut like this, it tends to crack over time. And these cracks have gotten pretty significant, to the point where if I put this on the lathe, it would rip itself apart. That would not work very well. And so, I'm going to have to do something a little bit different to make this piece of wood actually safe and usable. And that is going to be using epoxy to fill in all of these cracks to make this piece much more solid. And I'm going to be doing that in a slightly special way, which you'll see a little bit later in this video. The first thing I need to do though is get rid of some of the surface imperfections and clean up the overall piece of wood by removing this outer branch that's coming off and by getting the surface perfectly flat. I did these steps to make sure I could identify the species of the wood and to make sure there weren't any hidden cracks. After planing the piece of wood, it's pretty easy to see the beautiful, beautiful grain that it has. And by the distinctive smell that it has, I'm almost certain that this is aromatic cedar. Usually you would use something like this for building closets, as it's good at warding off bugs and moths due to its smell. But it should also work well enough for a bowl. So now that it's also cut up, you can see the cracks in the grain a lot more easily. And it definitely has a lot of cracks that need to be filled up. And the best method that I can think of off the top of my head is using epoxy, as I said. But epoxy sometimes has trouble getting into these tiny, tiny cracks that are present in this piece of wood. And so the solution I'm going to be employing for this is using a vacuum chamber to suck all of the air out of the epoxy and fully fill in all of the cracks in this piece of wood. To prepare the piece for the vacuum chamber, I made a simple mold out of cardboard and trash bags. This was to make sure that no resin would leak into the actual vacuum chamber. I tried to make the fit as circular and as snug as possible to make the final piece all the better. For the resin itself, I used a simple deep pour kit which allowed me to pour it several inches deep, and this was mixed with some black mica powder to give it some color. Once the ingredients were combined, I simply poured it all over the piece and ensured it was fully covered. For those of you who don't know how a vacuum chamber works, all I'm really doing is sucking all of the air out of this big pot. Reapply the lid. Hopefully there's not any dust on this and the connection will be nice and strong. Make sure it's centered up well. And now I'm going to apply the vacuum. So what's going to start to happen here is the resin should start to release all of its air, and it should fill in all of the gaps in the wood nicely as the vacuum starts to form. Yeah, there we go, starting to pretty vigorously bubble now. I've sped up the footage here just so you can see how high the resin rises after all of the air is removed from the pot. And after I let the air back in, the level drops even lower than when it started. This shows that the wood has soaked up a lot of the resin. After letting the resin fully cure, the wood has changed in a couple of ways. One, it's become much, much darker, and that's because it has absorbed all of the resin, which was holding all of the black mica powder. And secondly, the wood is much, much harder. It sounds like a stone more than it does a piece of wood now. And that is hopefully because the resin has filled in all of the little pores and gaps in the wood to really add some structural integrity to it. The resin ended up soaking into the wood way, way more than I actually thought it would, and that means that this crack here is still kind of visible. So what my plan is as of now is to plane this down a little bit more to see what the surface is looking like, and then potentially add some more resin to it if it needs to be strengthened further. After I finished this round of planing, it was clear to see that I was going to need to use some more resin. So I put the piece back in the vacuum chamber and started filling up the cracks. Once again, it's really easy to see how the volume of the resin appears to change in the vacuum chamber because all of the bubbles are being let out, before it finally returns back to how it was as all of the air is reintroduced. After one last bit of planing, it was finally time to put the piece onto the lathe. The first tool I'm using here is called a roughing gouge, and this is used to make the piece of wood more or less circular. If you listen closely, you can hear how my tool is skipping against the piece of wood, and that's because I'm only taking off the highest points or the farthest points away from the center of the piece of wood. As the piece becomes more circular, the high points and low points will become closer together and you'll hear less and less skipping. As I slow down the lathe here, you can see what low points I'm trying to work towards. And as I get closer to them, you can notice the amount of skipping becomes less, and less, and even less. You can also start to see the reddish purple heartwood starting to peek out from behind the tannish yellow sapwood. Now that the piece is much more circular, I can start to actually shape it into a bowl. To get more of a bowl shape, I'm simply tapering down one end to make it more rounded. Focusing now on the bottom part of the bowl, I'm using a flat scraper and a bowl gouge to flatten out the base of the bowl and to carve an indentation in the bottom that I can use to mount the bowl in the opposite direction. After this is done, it's just a matter of sanding the outside of the bowl up to a fine finish so I can start working on the inside. Now with the bowl mounted in the opposite direction, I'm simply going to be using a spindle gouge to hollow out the inside and get the shape I want. From here, it's a little bit more sanding and the piece is just about finished. And now for the last part of the process, applying the tung oil. I love doing this to my pieces just because it really gives them an amazing shine and shows me how nicely they came out. And speaking of nice, I'm incredibly satisfied with this piece. If I never did anything for this piece of wood, it simply would have just rotted into the earth, and I would have never had an amazing bowl like I have right now. So let's get some tung oil on here and really seal the deal. Oh yes, that is an amazing look. Wow, look at that. That's like purple almost. What a look for the tung oil. Now because this is end grain too that this is going into, this wood is going to be thirsty. It is going to drink up a ton of this oil. So I'm probably going to have to add several coats on here if I had to wager a guess, just for this very, very first application. So we can reach a point where we are fully filling in the wood. This is just becoming a lovely, lovely color, and I'm incredibly happy with it. I figured it would after looking at just the amazing grain that was underneath of the wood, but this is awesome. I'm incredibly, incredibly pleased with how this looks. And this just goes to show that with a little ingenuity, even a piece of wood that people are throwing away, that they don't even want to use at all, can be turned into an amazing project with a little bit of effort. I mean, this wood was free. I found it out in the woods. It was getting thrown away, turned into trash, into compost. But who would want to do that to something like this? It's now time to put the second coat of tung oil onto the bowl and finish off this project. I think it's going to get a nice glossy shine to it, and the bowl itself is going to look absolutely beautiful. So let's do that and really finish off this project. I still can't get over how nice this looks when it's all oiled up. It is truly a magnificent piece of wood. It is, it just takes on the color in such a lovely way. That dark purple shine. I am so happy with the color. And this really shows that even pieces that look like they're going to be completely junk, that they're something you would throw away, you wouldn't even put them in a fire pit to burn, can become an amazing project if you give a little bit of effort and you have a little bit of patience and a little bit of ingenuity with the wood you're using. It's you really can do a lot with different things if you set your mind to it. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, because a lot of people who try to get into woodworking think, oh, I need to spend hundreds of dollars on these insanely nice hardwoods, and I can't do this project unless I have the best tools in the world. But that's really not the case. With almost anything, even if you just have your hands and a saw, you can still do some unique projects. Another important thing to understand is that even if you have the perfect wood, a lot of it comes down to experience. You have to know how you're going to use the pieces and what's going to make them look the best. And sometimes, if you have just the lucky right amount of both of those things, you can make a project like this, where with the cheapest wood that you'll find, literally for free, going to be thrown away, you can still create a beautiful looking project like this. Now the good news is that as soon as this tung oil is fully cured up and ready to go, this bowl will actually be for sale up on my Etsy page. So if you really like this project and want this one-of-a-kind piece of art in your home, consider checking it out and seeing if it is something you'd want to get. And if you're not interested in buying, but you'd rather have some more behind-the-scenes content, consider checking out my Patreon, where I upload all of my videos a day early, in addition to miscellaneous extra content on smaller projects I'm doing, and behind the scenes on every single main video I make. And if neither of those interest you, well, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next one.